Which are some of the threats that cause the most anxiety for businesses, and maybe businesses should be worried about?
We are living in a cyber warfare. 68% of network security breaches is down to human error is a component in it. Threats can be lying in your network infrastructure for years without you seeing them. AI is enabling attacks to go faster, to evolve quicker. You're going to have an AI-powered bot who is going to literally fire all these variations of a user password to try and gain access to accounts. If someone wanted to make a big impact targeting critical infrastructure, targeting hospitals, financial services, utilities, impact our lives hugely.
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by TechDogs. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show, we have Victoria Dimmick, CEO of Titania, and a leader who made the leap from law and M&A to cybersecurity, not for the tech, but for the impact. As CEO of Titania, she's championing a mission to protect the digital backbone of industries we rely on every day, including healthcare, aviation, and finance. She's redefining what it means to be truly cyber resilient, not just breach-free. If you think firewalls and backups are enough, this conversation will make you think again. Let's dive in.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Discover Dialogues. Victoria, it's a pleasure to have you here today. You've had a very interesting career. I believe you started your journey in law.
Yes.
Were a part of a lot of mergers and acquisitions. Build a lot of businesses. And now you are at the forefront of cybersecurity. I would love to hear your story. I mean, it's a very interesting one, I'm sure, but I would love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. Thinking back now, maybe more than sort of 10, 11 years ago, perhaps. I guess I took the leap away from being. I was a lawyer. I was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. Did a lot of cross-border technology deals. So a lot of big technology customers, clients, and basically I got given the opportunity by a technology company that I'd known for many, many years and had become really good friends with the founders. To basically join them and move over to. They wanted me to help build their company and really set them up back in the UK and then globally to be able to ultimately achieve an exit for them. So that they put a lot of faith in me, a lot of trust in me. I think they've known me for a long time. I think they believed that they'd surround me with the right people. That I could help them achieve what they wanted to achieve. And I had a great few years. It was a huge adjustment, I'm not going to lie.
I can imagine.
Yeah. It was really eye-opening. I learned a lot, but having, I think, seen many technology companies grow from a sort of an M&A perspective and seen what investors were looking for, what acquirers were looking for, the size of the business that we needed to focus on. I took sort of that skill set with me to be able to be pretty analytical, sort of effectively project manage their build and sort of look for strategic acquirers. And we had a great few years. It was a great company. They had a product called CCleaner, which was an amazing tool, which had huge product-led growth. And
I still use it to the day. By the way. I do. I don't think a lot of people know about this tool. But back in the day, it was free, and obviously now it's got a subscription plan and stuff. And I think they also pivoted to the whole Android ecosystem I think a year, 2 years back, which I've been using as well. But I think for the laptops and for personal computing, they're a fantastic tool.
Yeah, absolutely. They were acquired by Avast Software back in 2017,
Right.
who then ended up being acquired themselves. It was a few years ago now that I left that business, but it really did. Yeah, I took a huge step off the corporate ladder. There's no doubt about it, it was no regrets whatsoever. I learned a lot along the way, and we achieved great success with that business. And then I kind of moved over I was given another opportunity at another business that had investors in it that they wanted me to help build that business effectively for exit. So again, did the same thing. And that was in Technica, which was a services business, which was acquired by a US technology services company called Crosslake.
Nice.
And then moved into another a cybersecurity product business, helped to grow that through investment. And then I was given this great opportunity over in Munich, whereby I kind of flipped myself, whereby I was looking at acquisitions as opposed to kind of, building inorganically, I guess, that business. That was a business called Multigo. Again, a great experience over a year, acquiring a number of businesses. And until I was given this CEO opportunity, was to kind of to go in and be the one, I guess, leading the build of this next cybersecurity business. So I've been here since November. We've got a great team. A great product that had amazing product-led growth. And I think that's what it's all about for me is actually, if you've got a great product, that is, you're winning already. You're winning already.
Absolutely.
So it is, again, then building the business around that product to be able to build bigger, that actually you need to sort of look at it sort of strategically. Actually, how can we now pivot this business away from purely product-led growth to really sort of put the structure and framework around it to get to that next level. So
absolutely. So from what I understand, you went from at some point, in that very sense, from advising companies to now steering them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, like you said, there's a lot of things that you learned by, while you were doing this, while you were in the hot seat. What would you say stands out remarkably, during the last decade or so of you doing this?
What the difference between advising and leading? I mean, it's completely different, right? Because ultimately, you're now the one that's accountable. You're the one that's got to effectively make the decisions, take the risks. You're not advising from afar, leaving it up to somebody else to make that decision. You've got to make decisions with not enough data, with not all the information you need. It's a little bit around gut, around your experience that you've had in the past and what's working, what isn't. But also you're the one, you've got to insulate other people in the organization because, you're the one that is in front of the board, you're in front of the investors, you are ultimately with, everyone else is helping you with the strategy because, there's various experts within the organization. I'm not expert around, marketing, sales, product. I have a view on things, and I think I've got a good track record in growing companies. But ultimately, it is the team that helps me make those decisions. But ultimately, I am accountable, right? And I want to help, insulate those people to be able to carry on with their day job, whereby to help enable the organization and to help us achieve what I think the organization is capable of achieving. I think it is ultimately it's a very different experience. I think, again, when you're advising, you are advising a certain set of people who have often been in that position before, understand the advice you're giving. Whereas, as a CEO of an organization, you have a huge amount of different types of people around you at different levels, different skill sets. I think that, ultimately, when you're advising, it's all around kind of there's a saying, I think, around sort of advising kind of sharpens your mind, which I think it does, because you have to be, because you're the expert in that situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think, when you're leading, I think actually there's a whole level of, growing in your soul and in yourself as well, because you're leading people, individuals, who maybe aren't used to going through this path that you've been on before, that advisors understand, but actually not everybody does within an organization.
One of the things I've noticed is that when you move into leadership roles such as a CEO, in many ways you need to know everything and not know everything. and I think that's the most difficult part of being at the top, right? So are there any things that you had to unlearn when you stepped into this role and said, okay, fine, I don't need to be doing this, or this is not something that I should be looking into? Because it just comes to you that when you're at the helm of things, you want to take charge, you want to drive, you want to grow, but then you have to unlearn certain things. Were there any instances of such that happened?
I think my transition from a COO, which I've been in a number of organizations, to a CEO, I definitely had to unlearn wanting to be in everything. So as a COO, you're across everything, and you know the detail of what's going on, because you have to make sure it's executed really effectively and quickly. And really, you are the partner to the CEO when the CEO is off doing their crazy stuff, right? I've been that sort of foil to that person, and having taken sort of this step from COO to CEO, I definitely had to unlearn wanting to make sure everything is okay, wanting to make sure that this detail is being done and that detail is being done. I'm probably still unlearning that. I'm sure my current COO can testify to that. But I think I've probably been very lucky though as well, though, because all the organizations, all the tech companies that I've joined post being a lawyer have all been, fast-paced environments. They've all been global remote environments. Actually, we've all worked remotely since I joined CCleaner. That was also a remote organization. We had an office, but we had founders. We were out in Barbados, we were out in UK, New York. We were everywhere. So I think there is a way of running those types of organizations that has been inbuilt in me from day one. So I've never had to kind of pivot away from managing in a different style, because I think there is a different style of managing remote organizations.
Absolutely, it is indeed, yeah.
But I've never had to unlearn that in-office behavior, because I've never really had it. In that respect, that's been easier and a smoother transition.
The future of work is going to be hybrid. It is going to be remote. But let's see.
I think some UK organisations have certainly gone to that. I think the issue is that organisations over the past few years, technology companies especially, have built a global workforce, and so you end up going into the office to be on a Teams call with someone in the US, or you end up so it kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I equally think it's really important that you do get together in person. And I think, we certainly have, in-person meetings where we all get together and focus for a couple of days, and we achieve a lot in those meetings. So, but at the same time, you also then learn to run Teams meetings quite effectively. And I think that people who aren't used to doing remote work, that's actually where they often fall down. So it's something that I've always had as part of my career, past being a lawyer, when I was definitely in the office 24/7, actually, not even 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 24/7. I'm really joking. That's a different experience, but it's one that I've always had, I suppose. So I'm quite happy operating like this.
And obviously, when you worked remote for so long, and in that sense, because the world is evolving to remote or hybrid structures, one of the things that kind of evolves with it is the need for cybersecurity, right? To keep yourself secure, your organization secure, your employees secure, your data secure, your IP secure. I think one of the questions I would love to ask is, given that we are in 2025 today, what does a false sense of security look like for businesses and individuals alike?
I think there's probably different levels to this, but ultimately, I think a lot of people still conflate security with compliance. So they think, okay, we're compliant, so we check this box, so we're secure.
Right.
And I think that, there is certainly in compliance is important, but that's one small baseline level of security. Yeah. And you need to build beyond that. I think that that doesn't equate to resilience. I think it's really important at this point that, the organizations, and you see this in a lot of the kind of evolving legislation, that actually you need to be aiming for resilience, not baseline security. I think it's important that, that people as well, they often think, okay, we bought this tool, so therefore, and we've deployed it, we've set it and forgotten it. Set and forget,
Yeah.
We've got a firewall, right? Okay.
Right.
And they kind of box checked.
Yeah.
Once a year, we'll go in and we'll audit. Yeah. Okay, box checked. And that people to understand that is a baseline level, that actually threats are evolving daily. Right. That they need to be continuously assessing their network, see where threats can come from. I also think there is a big part of people believing that they haven't been attacked. Actually, right. We've never had a cyber attack.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's.
I have never not had a cyber attack. So I would, and I think also clearly at the minute, you see with things like Volt Typhoon happening, that actually threats can be lying in your network infrastructure for years without you seeing them. So actually, and they can be, what's really important is actually making sure that you have complete visibility of your network infrastructure, and segment it off. Ensure that your critical parts of your infrastructure are more protected, right. Because it's not a case of if, it is a case of when. And it's okay, well, how resilient are you to be able to get back up and going again? Are the most critical parts of your infrastructure actually secure? Because, I think in this day and age where, threats are evolving as quickly as they are, I think, you might have a layer of defensive AI in there, but I'll tell you what, there's now a layer of offensive AI. So absolutely. Actually, you've got to put your boundaries in that are secure at a really, at a really critical level that you can supplement it. Absolutely, AI. I've gone not saying that isn't something that organizations should look to ensure that they take advantage of. Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's a saying is around hospitals. So you can have your robotic brain surgeon, but actually, if you run out of bandages, then actually someone's going to bleed to death. So actually, it's having that baseline, ensuring that your defense is there, and then build it up. Fine, great, but that base level defense is still there.
You touched upon compliance. How businesses today still look, implementing cybersecurity solutions more from a compliance point of view and not purely from a protection or an investment point of view. Obviously, these discussions are very different in boardrooms. Between boardrooms and management and stakeholders or CTOs. Yeah. Right. And so here's an CTO who's trying to have that conversation with his business, saying that these are some of the things that we ought to implement, and they're speaking different languages.
Absolutely.
And how does one navigate that?
I think it is really tough. I do think this is evolving a lot, because you're in a boardroom and everyone looks at a board report, okay, and what they're most interested in is, okay, well, actually, is this business going to survive? Are we getting enough revenue in? Do we have enough marketing leads at the top of the funnel to service our revenue? Is our product being evolving correctly in the market? Is the market opportunity there? What are the financials like? But what they don't realize is actually the thing that they could effectively take down their business, as we have seen, a number of times recently, is actually not being operationally resilient enough. And whether it's a cyber attack or whether it's testing gone wrong or no testing on a release of a software update, these are the things that can kill your revenue in your business and your reputation, and you lose your data. And actually, then you've got to get yourself back up again. So it is, I think that's the language that a board understands. So talking about it in the sense of, we've passed our compliance check for PCI DSS, or for, I think that's kind of like, okay, great. From a risk
Yeah.
perspective, boards
Yeah.
are clearly that risk and governance is important to them,
Mm.
but you'll get their attention more if you say, okay, if we don't do this and we are subject to a cyber attack, which we have seen has, in the last 12 months has affected this number of organizations, then actually the cost to the business is going to be downtime, which means no revenue for X amount of days. Claims for compensation coming out of our ears and high insurance premiums. Actually, it's also going to cost us this much operationally to get us back up and running because, we don't have our CMDB, which is our source of truth, of kind of how our network should be stood up again. So I think that is how you kind of capture a board's attention. It is the reality of the world we're now existing in, that around cyber attacks and the evolving threats that are out there, and then also the reality of, we understand we need to be up quickly, so we understand that this part of our network is critical to the business. So therefore, by doing this, by implementing this policy or this part of technology security stack, then actually this will enable us to secure that part as critical, as key, and we will continuously look at that. And this isn't, yes, it means we do satisfy these regulations and these compliance checks, but what we're leading with is that business uptime. So it's operational resilience for the business. And I think it's just speaking a different language that I think that, the board can maybe, they don't understand cybersecurity, but it captures the attention a bit more, gets the attention a little bit more.
There's a lot of focus on the types of threats businesses are facing, but in your opinion, which are some of the threats that cause the most anxiety for businesses and maybe businesses should be worried about? Is it human errors? It could be one of those, or it could be deliberate, attacks, that are made.
Yeah, do you know what? Sadly, I think it's both of those things. I think there's a report. I think it's by Gartner where they're saying something. I think I wrote it down. It's like 68% of network security breaches is down to human error is a component in it. And, so this is it. That is certainly something that we should be aware of and should be concerned about. So then, it's like, well then, if that happens, how do we again secure our most critical parts of the system? How can we get back up quickly? I think again that is a key part of this. But then we see with nation state attacks that they clearly, with Bolton, Salt Typhoon, they are clearly there at the moment, and we are living in a cyber warfare is changing hugely at the moment, and we are living our lives online at the moment. It is getting more so like that.
Absolutely.
Our data is being consumed, and we are relying on computer systems to effectively tell us what to do and when, and it controls every aspect of our life. I struggle to think of an aspect where it doesn't play an integral part, and therefore we need to ensure that we are as safe and secure as possible, and that if someone wanted to make a big impact targeting critical infrastructure, targeting hospitals, financial services, utilities, impact our lives hugely. So, we can't be complacent, I think, in this day and age, that we have to protect as much as possible, and ensure that, and we have seen this, and I think that is now what is making people more aware and believing that this is a reality as well. And I don't see it going anywhere. I only see this being a bigger area for attack, and with AI as well. And I think that is where this will ultimately be really.
And any specific industries do you think that were traditionally perhaps not prone, or the most obvious choices? We would know that it would be finance to start off with, more prone to attacks. But are there any other industries that you're saying that have, because of AI, perhaps become easier targets? We talked about finance. I think healthcare is something that you mentioned as well, critical infrastructures. But are there any other sectors or industries you feel are now becoming easier targets, which were not traditionally?
Well, actually, do you know what? And any online retail, that is where, I think things like account takeover, this is where, AI will absolutely help leverage attacks because, and I have seen this in the past in previous organizations, to be honest with you, whereby, we had customers who were being attacked constantly, that to try and access users' accounts. It's the whole password, like, okay, you're going to have an AI-powered bot who is going to literally fire all these variations of a user password to try and gain access to accounts. So, absolutely right. That is an area where I've absolutely seen AI being leveraged in that way. But in terms of attacks in different sectors, I'm not sure I know of an industry where attacks aren't prevalent, because I've seen a number of supply chain attacks as well to try and, so even if you are not the end company that they want to infiltrate, ultimately it's a way to get to that end company. So that is, I've seen supply chain attacks on a number of occasions. So whereby you would think, well, why on earth would someone cyber attack this business? Well, actually, they may have some valuable data. They may have, software that, larger companies or, critical infrastructure do use. And this is what a lot of these new regulations are trying to address, is actually you need to tighten up your supply chain. You need to ensure that this isn't the avenue, this isn't the way they're going to get into your organization. It's another point about, you think you're secure until you're not, right? But actually, you might have your own defenses in your organization, but it's a very, very easy way for cyber attacks to come in is through the supply chain.
Victoria, earlier in the conversation, I remember you talked about resilience. But I think in the cybersecurity space, what we've seen is that people use resilience and response interchangeably. What's the difference there? And are most companies confusing it?
Yeah, I mean, they're entirely different things, right? So response is tactical. I think resilience is a strategy. But when you're response, right, you're like, I don't play football or soccer or whatever you call it in the US, right? But I play netball in the UK. So for me, that's like being in defense, right? That's what you are. If you're in response, you're in defense all the time. But ultimately, I think being resilient is really about your ability to kind of receive an impact, but keep operating. So, it is about, you reducing your attack surface. So, for example, you've segmented your network, so you've reduced your attack surface. That is trying to make you as resilient as possible. I think that, with resilience, I think you've got to assume that the attacks are already there. So therefore, how you've got to limit the damage. You've got to make the organization as resilient as possible. If you're just responding to attacks, you've not been able to limit the damage because you're having to clean up after the attack has happened. So I think they're entirely different things. And I think that, yes, clearly to have a response plan is important, but that is purely tactical, to be able to say at the beginning, right, okay, you talk about the board, right? Okay, so for a response, you come back, you go back to the board and say, we received this cyber attack, but look at all these things we're now doing. It's costing the business this much money, and actually we've been offline for 10 days. And actually, but actually you can go to the board and say, right, okay, we've had an attack, but you know what? We're already up and running. Or okay, what's the impact on the business? Very little, because we made our attack surface smaller. There was less they could do. They didn't make it into the crown jewels. They didn't make it into infiltrating this part of the network, which would have damaged our business so much. So it is making sure and I think this goes for, not just it's your human error and your state-sponsored attacks that we were talking about earlier. Okay, so being resilient helps you on both of those parts. Whereas, you don't want to be in that response element. Yes, you want to have a plan, but you need to be able to go say, actually, I had a plan before. We were attacked, and I've executed that plan. And look what actually we've managed to do in the face of this attack. Here you are. Your business has been unaffected, hardly affected. Whatever you've managed to kind of narrow your attack surface down to.
And because the world is evolving at such a rapid pace, because of AI, how do you as a CEO decide what should we be building for? What are the
Yeah.
future threats going to look like? Because you probably have no idea. I mean, neither would I have. But how do you go about looking at it? What lens are you looking at it from?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think ultimately you do at the core, you need to have real visibility. I think that, you need to have a real-time view of your vulnerabilities. You need to understand, you have to be able to see what you've got. You need to understand what they are. And I think at this moment in time, there's so much threat intelligence out there as well, that you overlay that with threat intelligence. And I think that there are, industry specific, attack tactics, techniques that I think you can overlay it with industry specific ones. And then I think that what you should always be looking at is ways that you can help organizations minimize their preventable disruptions. I think that's they would be the key things I would be looking at. What that specific technology is, if I knew that now, maybe I might be starting that tomorrow. But those are the fundamental principles that I do believe should be at the core of anything that we are looking to do in cybersecurity going forwards.
We've covered things from challenges in cybersecurity, what we should be speaking in boardrooms or the conversations in boardrooms, and obviously how the threat landscape keeps on evolving. We're going to try and make it a little light now. This is a segment that I like the most.
The one I like the least, probably.
So this is a segment where I get to ask you, a set of quick rapid fire questions. This is actually for our audiences to get to know you a little bit better as a person. I think a lot of the times people look at CEOs and CXOs from a very different lens. They perhaps forget at some point that they are still humans at the other side. So I'd love for you to be completely candid, quick. Whenever you're ready, just let me know and we'll go for it.
Okay.
First question: introvert, extrovert, or situational chameleon?
I think I can be an extrovert, but actually I do think it depends. I can read a room fairly well, and I think so maybe I'm a situational chameleon. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are you a big dreamer or you're a detail obsessed person?
I think it depends on the situation. I think that I wouldn't say I'm detail obsessed, but I know that also detail is important. I guess I am still a lawyer at heart. As much as I try to get that out.
I was just gonna, if you at this point had said that you are not detail obsessed, I would probably have asked you that question again, because a lawyer at the very core has to be detail oriented. I mean, it's the words and the commas that make a lot of difference.
I reckon I'm getting a little bit less out of the detail, but yes, it depends on the situation. It's still important.
Okay. Are you a mountain person or a city street person?
I'm a beach person. I'm a coast person, I think, actually.
What's your guilty pleasure after a long work week?
Gosh, after a long work week. I like a nice glass of wine, nice food, great conversation, being with my friends. Just that unwind, right, after on a Friday evening. Definitely sorts out the week.
Growing up, were you a rule breaker or were you a rule follower?
I reckon I was a rule stretcher.
You've
I can say I was a rule breaker, but I was definitely a rule stretcher, knowing which rules I could stretch to nearly breaking point.
The next one is, what's that one local spot near your hometown or in the UK that you feel that everyone should experience at least once?
Gosh, yeah. What did I say on that one? There's this great. Do you know what? There's this great spot in. I live in a county called Cheshire, just south of Manchester. Yeah. I'll often go for a walk on what we call the Edge, which is kind of a National Trust park which overlooks kind of the edge of Alderley Edge in Cheshire, and it's a beautiful view down over the valley. So yeah, that's a pretty spectacular place to be, I guess.
Nice. Next time in the UK, I'm definitely going to have a well, at least I'll plan, to this place. And I'll reach out to you probably.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Are you a window seat person or an aisle seat person? And does
Uh,
it matter?
No, so I am quite specific on this, but it depends if it's business or pleasure. So if it's business, always the aisle seat.
Right, same here.
Yeah. If it's pleasure, I would more likely go for the window seat.
What is that one secret no one knows about you and you're comfortable sharing with the audience?
Oh my God, one secret.
Yeah. Something that people don't know about you, but now they will. So,
Okay, so that's a different question to a secret, like something my work colleagues don't know about me.
okay, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. Yeah. One
Okay.
secret that your work colleagues don't know, and I'm sure we'll share the video with them as well. But yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, so I guess they I don't know if they would be surprised. They may or may not be surprised that I've jumped out of planes, I've done bungee jumps, I've jumped off the side of buildings when I was younger.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I was probably a little bit of a daredevil when I was younger. And
Right.
I'm not. Yeah.
The way I look at, definitely not a rule stretcher. In that case, more of a rule breaker. I'm sure.
There's always definitely been that knowing do you know what? That's fair, right? So if I'm a rule breaker, I probably know the consequences of my actions, and I'm willing to take.
Yeah, I'm sure. Back in the day when you went out to your parents and said, sir, I'm going to jump off a cliff, and they said they had a rule: no jumping off cliffs.
Yeah, I was probably always the first to try something new like that. But I'm still here.
Are you a iOS person or a Android person?
Yeah, iOS. So yeah, all the way.
What's that one thing that keeps you going every day?
Oh yeah, my kids, right? My
Nice.
girls. No one knows what life brings, right? And no one knows what's around the corner. I've definitely learned that. And I think actually always being prepared to do something new, to to kind of not just exist, right? And
Right.
I'm a big proponent of exercise every day if I can. Last year I took up boxing. I was like, right, I'm just going to do something new. I was out stand-up paddleboarding last week for the first time. So I'm kind of like, anytime I can, what keeps me going is to go, what's the next new adventure?
I think what keeps you going is essentially the fact that you're really looking for the next adventure. But yeah, I mean, good to know a lot more about you, which we would have otherwise not known. Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on cybersecurity, the response versus resilience. I'm sure our listeners are walking away with a lot. And thank you so much once again for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate this. Any parting words or thoughts that you have?
No, thank you very much for having me. I think what we discussed today, I think I'm sure a lot of organizations understand and do the climate we're operating in right now. It can be a little bit of a crazy world out there, but I do think that people are aware what how to best protect their organizations, and there are clearly lots of products in cybersecurity, and it is probably too many in a way. So really trying to kind of understand what your organization needs and what best practice it can get to, I think is really important. And just to make sure the organization is operation resilient. As a board member, as a CEO, that's something that I can understand. So I think that if people want to talk to the board, right, that is definitely something that resonates with me as a CEO as well. When I'm going, okay, how's our organization? Are we operationally resilient enough? So
fantastic. Thank you so much for your time once again, Victoria. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast. I had an absolute blast of a time. So would love to have you back.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.